also someone who I hope you'll engage in dialogue with.
Could you be louder, Paul?
Oh, I need a microphone. Yeah, you might.
You want to grab this one?
I won't repeat what I just said, so I'll say something new. We have a wonderful speaker who's going to engage you, and then you're going to engage her, and you'll engage each other as to the plight of women under the Trump administration. I was going to say regime, and I corrected myself. Administration. Whatever. Anyway, Carrie's been fighting the good fight for a long time to help make things a little better for women whose rights are being, as it says in our PR material, eroded. So you'll hear a little about the forces of erosion, but also I think you'll hear a little about the opposite tendency, which is to win some battles, either in the courts or in Congress or in small towns like Whately, and we add up enough of those and we could make a difference. This presentation is brought to you by the Whately Civic Association, which is a new, very non-profit organization. In fact, we're not legally organized at all. We're just a group of people who want to make life better for us and everybody else. And so one way we do that is to have our speaker series, and the last one was Bill Newman, the attorney in Northampton, who has a radio show. He came and talked about justice, which I won't explain what that means, but you've heard the word. And Carrie also will mention justice with regard to women's rights. So she's a professor of
Women, Gender, and Sexuality.
Women, Gender, and Sexuality at Smith College. And so we're very, very happy that she could take time to come out here to Whately and share with us some of her thoughts and insights into the situation as it affects women. So please give Carrie a warm hand, and thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for coming out on this cold evening. And it's so wonderful to be here. I love Whately because I go to Watermelon Wednesday, and I go up to the Milkleash Field Station and hike around. And I've been to some concerts here, and I just really love your town. So yeah, I live down in Northampton and near Smith, where I work. And I have been teaching women's rights law for going on 25 years. I taught my first gender law and policy class. Actually, at the time, it was Women in the Law in 2001. I had just graduated from Emory with a PhD in women's studies and a JD, a law degree. And so I have been tracking women's rights, the evolution of women's rights for 25 years in a range of areas, including employment rights, education rights, rights around violence against women, family law rights, immigration, gender and immigration, a whole lot of areas, and reproductive rights, of course. And, you know, it's never a straight line forward, but it was a general line forward over the last 25 years. You know, made some progress, a little back, a little forward, a little back. And now we're just falling off a cliff. We're falling off a cliff. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of what I see is going on. In part, I think it is a backlash to our progress. But I'm going to do it through the lens of Project 2025. So I write for Ms. Magazine, and last year, I also have a column in the Daily Hampshire Gazette, a monthly column, and a radio show. Yeah, yeah. And a radio show on WHMP with Bill Newman. It's called Feminist Futures, the third Tuesdays. And I got on this thing last year because I heard about this thing called Project 2025, like in the spring, before there was much talk about it. And I decided, being a glutton for punishment, that I would download the 900-page agenda for the next conservative president and read it. And I, pants on fire. I was like, oh my God, this is a nightmare. And so I began to publish articles with Ms. in the Gazette, and I talked about it on the radio show. And I did a presentation actually for Smith's students, where I was like, here's what they want to do. And so when I was asked to do this, I went back to that presentation and I thought about, okay, what have they done of what they've promised to do? And so I'm going to structure this by giving you a little background on Project 2025 in case you don't know. You probably have heard of it, you probably know some about it, but it was really helpful for me to go back now that we are 10 months into the Trump administration and look back at their plan and the things they said back then and where we are now. Because I think it's just illuminating about what's been happening in our country. So, okay. So I actually wrote this article for Ms. Magazine in 2017, in the winter issue, Civil Rights Wronged. It was, you know, we were kind of completely caught off guard. I mean, not completely, but, you know, when Hillary Clinton lost and Trump got elected. And what we at Ms. Magazine noticed right away was that one of the goals of the Trump administration was to dismantle the civil rights infrastructure throughout the federal government. There were other goals too, like deregulate business, and there were other goals, get rid of environmental protections. But what I focused on in this piece was the way that he was going at the very structure of the federal government that enforced our civil rights laws, the laws passed as a result of the civil rights movement, like the Civil Rights Act of 1965, which had things like Title VII, which prohibited race and sex discrimination in employment, other, the Voting Rights Act, all of that. And so this was a piece I interviewed, I think 9 different top Obama officials that had worked in the federal government that knew exactly how those offices functioned and could see what Trump was doing. And it was quite a shocking piece. And I really, it's called Civil Rights Wrong, but it was about how Trump is trying to dismantle the civil rights infrastructure. The federal government is absolutely key to the enforcement of civil rights in this country. Women's rights, rights against race discrimination, all of that, right? Almost every government agency has an Office of Civil Rights within it, whose task is to enforce the law. And we average citizens can bring a lawsuit in court to get a law enforced, but actually a lot of it happens through the federal government. And and this has been going on for years. Whenever Republicans got in, going back to Reagan, they tried to get rid of that. And then when Democrats went in, they strengthened that, right? And it had been like a pendulum over the years. And the last 25 years, I really noticed it because I was teaching it. And every year when I got to my PowerPoint, I had to update it depending on who the president was, because it was literally like a pendulum. So I don't think that the right thought Trump would win. So the Heritage Foundation, which produced Project 2025, it was actually not a new thing. For every election, they produced a mandate for leadership, right? Going back to Ronald Reagan. The first year was 1980, and they had here's what we want Reagan to do. And Reagan did a lot of what they wanted. But he'd had it for every year. They had this sort of plan. But I think they really didn't have a very strong one in 2016. And then, of course, Trump was kind of disorganized. So he did a lot of damage, but he was kind of didn't know what he was doing. But they were so prepared this time. So I want to start by talking a little bit about their plan, which they had, which they are enforcing. So could you advance it? Oh, how funny. I advanced it, but you didn't. So if you advance it, you'll see what I was just talking about. So that's the article, Civil Rights Wronged, that I've just been talking about, that I thought mine was connected. So again, that's the one I wrote in 2017. While headlines focus on the latest White House scandal, remember the days when things were scandalous, President Donald Trump's executive agencies are working quietly to roll back civil rights protections and enforcement. And so that was kind of the theme of that article. Could you go to the next slide? This is what I published in the issue before the election. Misogynist Manifesto, Project 2025, the extremist blueprint for the next Republican president, maps out the permanent reversal of more than 50 years of hard-fought gains for American women and girls. Here's how it would play out. And so, you know, this was fall of 2024, so this was before the election. I was trying to like send up a flare. And so anyway, I can share these articles with you if you're interested, but could you advance it to the next slide? I just want to talk a little bit about who's behind it. So it was written by the Heritage Foundation, a right-wing think tank. And again, going back to late 70s, Edwin Meese was on the original board. Some of you will remember his name, and others. But the interesting thing from my perspective is it was supported by a coalition of 100 organizations. And it was every anti-women's rights organization that existed, right? And some of them you'll recognize. Concerned Women for America. Like concerned women might be getting too many rights. Independent Women's Forum. Do you remember where that came about? That came about, it was the group of women supporting Clarence Thomas when Anita Hill stepped forward to oppose. And they formed this group. And they've been trying to erode women's rights. I mean, women eroding women's rights forever, Republican women. Association of Pro-Life Obstetrician and Gynecologists. Eagle Forum. How many remember Phyllis Schlafly's Eagle Forum? That's what that is. They're still around. She's not, but they are. Susan B. Anthony Foundation, which this is an anti-abortion group that has taken Susan B. Anthony's name and used it for their anti-abortion group, which always has really pissed me off. Moms for Liberty, you've probably heard of them, the book banning group. Students for Life of America. Alliance Defending Freedom, which is the group that litigated Dobbs, which overturned Roe versus Wade and constitutional abortion rights. First Liberty and Turning Point USA. That's Charlie Kirk's org. Charlie Kirk. So these are just some of the organizations. This is actually the board of the Heritage Foundation. I was doing a deep dive, who are the people? Anyway. So this is the kind of people behind it. It was actually written, they say, by over 300 experts with the support of over 100 conservative organizations. Again, 900 pages. Go on to the next slide, Paul, thank you. So who funded it? Yes, he did. Leonard Leo, you all know who he is? Yeah, he's the guy that funded the takeover of the Supreme Court. He was the one behind the strategy to capture the Supreme Court. And I do think when we're thinking about what's happening now, we have to think about it as a 1-2 punch. It was key that Trump took over the Supreme Court to enable him to do what he's doing now. We see that, right? So Leo is a major funder of the organizations behind Project 2025. He bankrolled the right-wing takeover of the Supreme Court and the federal lower courts during the Trump's first administration. He's aiming for a similar right-wing takeover of the executive branch of the federal government during a second Trump administration. So this is my slide from back last year, but I thought this was really helpful. So we all know that the judicial branch has been destroyed, at least the Supreme Court, not the lower so much. I mean, Trump appointed a couple hundred judges and they're there, but it's interesting because a lot of his own appointees are ruling against him now. But then the case gets to the Supreme Court and whatever. So far they've been enabling him. But what my argument was, they blew that up. They were trying to blow this up. They're going to try to do to the executive branch what they did to the judicial branch, right? And then, succeed in doing all of their work. Okay, so just a little background on Leonard Leo. He is a devout Catholic who is intensely opposed to women's reproductive rights, including abortion and contraception. I mean, I think he's motivated by a number of different things, but that's certainly one of them. All right, next slide, please. What's that?
He claims to speak for God. That's the
Yes.
commandment that has the
Yes.
clause.
Claims to speak for God. Yeah. And actually, Project 2025 is a Christian nationalist document. It's deeply Christian nationalist. I mean, they want their narrow version of Christianity to reign over all of us, and we have to all follow it, right? That's the goal. That's the goal. Read it. It's in black and white. It's shockingly, they don't hide anything. So the plan, and this is interesting in light of what you've all seen over the last 9 years, and again, this is from before, but the plan, they say explicitly, is to dismantle the administrative state. What does that mean? Well, it's the government, it's the federal government, but they're particularly focused on the federal government's civil rights infrastructure, which is key to enforcing civil rights laws in the US, including laws against both sex and race discrimination in employment, education, housing, credit, public accommodations, and voting. okay? So I've been looking, paying a lot of attention to how are they doing this over the last 10 months. And here's some language from Project 2025. I'm quoting from it. I even gave you the page number in case you don't believe me, because it's kind of intense. The solution is not to tinker with this or that government program, to replace this or that bureaucrat. These are problems not of technocratic efficiency, but of national sovereignty and constitutional governance. We solve them not by trimming and reshaping the leaves, but by ripping out the trees, root and branch. And that's what we've been seeing. Further, the authors of Project 2025 boasted about, quote, how to fire supposedly unfireable federal bureaucrats. That's a quote. And, quote, how to muzzle woke propaganda at every level of government. That kind of rhetoric is throughout. Can you go to the next slide? And it wasn't just in Project 2025, it was in the authors' Project 2025, like Russell Vogt, out in the public talking. He once said, the president, day one, will be a wrecking ball for the administrative state. That was in August of 2023. That was over a year before the election. They had this plan, they had been working on this. So the destruction we've seen of the federal government, they were so prepared to do this. It was their goal, they were open about it, and I guess just people didn't believe them or weren't listening. Next slide, please. Oh, I'm sorry, go back one. Do you know who Russell Vogt is now? Yeah, he's the head of the Office of Management and Budget. And there was just an article in the New Yorker, the recent issue, saying he's actually the person running the government at this point. And his goal is to destroy the government. So go to the next slide. You also hear this from people like Steve Bannon. And what he said, and this was in June of 2024, so a couple months before the election, we're going to rip and shred the federal government apart. Rip and shred. They use this really violent language. And this is what they're doing. I mean, we've seen this, right? And again, I think there's a lot of motivations. I'm going to focus on women's rights, because I do think I do think when I say misogynist manifesto, I do think misogyny is at the very core of 2025, but that's not the only thing. It's complicated, but I'm going to focus on that. Next slide, please. So, of course, Trump distanced himself. Do you remember that? And he's like, oh, no, I don't even know what that is. Who's Russell Vogt? Amid shutdown fight, Trump no longer distancing himself from Project 2025. So this was just recently. This was back in August of 2024.
His prison sentence.
Yeah.
25 years.
Yeah, really. So, he obviously was very aware they were doing this for him. He was very, and if you look at who he's appointed to all the positions in the government, they're all Project 2025 authors. I mean, Russell Vogt was the head, but there are all these, the way the document was organized is it was on different departments. So like Department of Energy, Department of Education, it just went from and each author of the section talking about how they were going to dismantle this department or weaponize it for their, ICE. They're not going to dismantle ICE. They're going to build ICE up. Those people often got put in charge of those departments. Mr. I don't know what 25 is. Yeah, so next slide, please. So there are 4 pillars of Project 2025. So one of them is this 887-page policy agenda, and that was certainly important. But there was also something else that got a lot less attention in the media. They created they called it a presidential personnel database of vetted conservatives. They created basically a list. Remember with the Federal Society when they created that list of judges that they wanted? That had been vetted by really far-right. They did the same thing for the executive branch. They had this list of people, but they needed more people, of course. And so they also had a presidential administration academy to train these people to achieve the Project 2025 policy agenda. So they had, I don't know how many they actually ended up training and putting into this database, but a lot. And actually some of the videos that they used to train people were released. Do you remember that? They were crazy. I wonder if you could find them. But they're weirdest people, doing the weirdest things. But they were basically training people in the Project 2025 agenda. So it was okay, when he gets elected, you're going to get put in this government position, and this is what you need to do. So they were very prepared. That's why they're so quickly dismantling everything. It's not like they're doing it on the fly. They had a playbook. Speaking of which, they also had a 180-day playbook, which is what they hope to achieve in the first 180 days if Trump takes office in January 2025. So that's why it felt like a fire hose, because it was a fire hose. There was language where they were talking about, we are gonna overwhelm them. They're not gonna know what's coming. And I don't know about you, but that's how it felt to me. Even though I knew that was coming, it still felt like that, because I was like, is this really happening? Okay, next slide. So these were the 4 goals, and I guess I'm laying this out because in thinking about women's rights, I sort of want to highlight where that connects, and also the irony of these goals. So the very first one, and this is where gender I think is so central, is to restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children. So there's so much loaded language here. So like, what do you mean by family? Are you including same-sex couples? Are you including a single mom and her kids? Who do you mean by family? Well, they have a very specific idea of family, and I'll explain that in a minute. Dismantle the administrative state and return, this is ironic, return self-governance to the American people. Do you think that's what Trump's about? No way, no way. But, they were clear, they're gonna dismantle the administrative state. It was all that language, the deep state, right, the deep state. Defend our nation's sovereignty, borders, and bounty against global threats. That's about immigration and about beating up people like, Venezuela. And then secure, and this just makes me so mad. I did a whole article on the hypocrisy in Project 2025. If you go to my website, I have under my public writing, there's a drop-down menu and there's a tab that's Project 2025, and all my articles are there. And I did about 10 or 15, and one of them was like, the hypocrisy. But secure our God-given, so there's a lot of God in here. It's a biblical document. Secure our God-given individual rights to live freely. What our Constitution calls the blessings of liberty. So you first of all see this combination of religion and government. Second of all, they always talk about living freely and liberty. They don't care about women's liberty. They are all about restraining women, especially reproductively. So it always just really grated on my nerves when they tried to pretend like they believe in liberty when they're all about taking away women's liberty. So next slide. So here are just some of the examples of their policy agenda for women, things like shoring up, and they use this language, biblically based heterosexual marriage and procreation. So we'll unpack that in a second. Eliminating abortion and restricting access to contraception. They're not just going after abortion. They want a nationwide abortion ban, but they also want to get rid of contraception. Why? Leonard Leo is a devout Catholic. And according to the U.S. Conference of not Catholic people, but according to the hierarchy of Catholicism, they don't like contraception. They think it's interrupting God's plan, right? Now, real Catholics in the street use contraception and have abortions at the exact same rate as everybody else. So they're not following their church, but the people with all the money in charge, and people like Leonard Leo, are taking this idea that contraception is bad, and they put it in there. Let's get rid of contraception. Let's restrict. There's a lot of language about, I'll talk about it in a second, how they are getting rid of contraception. Gutting programs to help poor and low-income mothers feed and care for their children. Why would they want to do that? They don't like single parents. They think children should grow up in families with their biologically related mother and father, and that if a woman has a child outside of marriage, it should be taken away from her and adopted to a good Christian family. That's what they think. And so they feel like these social safety net programs are enabling women to have children without men. And they don't like that because they want the patriarchal family back. And I'll talk about the policies, the specifics of the policies and how they're trying to do that. And I'll just go on, making draconian cuts to Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security, eliminating workplace protections against sex discrimination, because they really don't want women in the workplace at all, or at least some women. Rolling back Title IX protections, which is the law that prohibits sex discrimination in education. Rolling back protections against sexual harassment and assault. You can see why Donald Trump would want that. Eliminating LGBTQ rights. There's a lot in there about eliminating LGBTQ rights and so much more. Next slide. So this is the language in the foreword written by Kevin Roberts, who is the head of the Heritage Foundation. I don't know if anybody's been following in the last day or so. There's a major split happening right now with the Heritage Foundation, which I won't get into, but Google it, it's very interesting. Quickly. It's because this guy said he loves Tucker Carlson, and Tucker Carlson had Nick Fuentes on his podcast, and Nick Fuentes said, I love Stalin, and like, I hate Jews. And rather than disavowing Tucker Carlson and canceling him, Roberts embraced him. And now there's a lot of people in the Heritage Foundation that can't go quite that far, can't go explicitly Stalin. At least, on their group texts they can, but they don't want it out. They don't want to be aligned with Nick Fuentes. Because Nick Fuentes, was in a major battle with Charlie Kirk, and he's the Groypers guy, Nick Fuentes. Anyway, I won't get into the weeds here, but interesting story, Google it. So this is what he said in the introduction. The next conservative president must make the institutions of American civil society hard targets for the woke culture warriors. This starts with deleting the terms sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, reproductive rights, and any other term used to deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights out of every federal rule, agency, regulation, contract grant, regulation, and piece of legislation that exists. I know, it's head spinning. It's truly head spinning. It's head spinning because reproductive rights? Gender? Woke? Woke is like, I think I counted, I think woke is used 133 times in the report. It's like so many times. But how is it that these things deprive Americans of their First Amendment rights? Again, that's the example of the hypocrisy. They're like, by you saying what you believe, you're depriving me of my First Amendment rights, so I'm going to shut you down because I believe in the First Amendment. It's that kind of bizarre, twisted thinking. And you may think I'm caricaturing this report, so go read it yourself. It truly is bizarre, just bizarre. It's off the deep end. All right, next slide. And I can stop anytime. I know we need time for, okay, so I'm gonna be reading some quotes from Project 2025 that will give you a flavor of what some of these things mean. So, marriage, patriarchal family. Married men and women are the ideal natural family structure because all children have the right to be raised by the men and women who conceived them. So no IVF, no LGBTQ families, no single parents. The government policy should, quote, maintain a biblically based, social science reinforced, definition of marriage and family. Okay, wait a minute. The government should maintain a biblically based, I told you it was a Christian nationalist document. And they're not just talking about your Bible, if you're a Christian. It's a very particular kind of biblical interpretation, right? And I kind of get into this in some of my articles because I'm actually married to someone with a PhD in religion, and so I talk a lot about religion and think a lot about religion. It's this idea of complementarianism. So this idea of what they mean by biblically based marriage is that men and women are complementary, and the woman is submissive, and the man is the governor of the family. It's this very antiquated, bizarre idea of marriage, right? That they're trying to revive. And they're not just doing it in their churches, they're trying to do it through our federal government and impose it on everybody else, not just the religious people that believe it. I'm fine if that's your religion and you want to do that. Go you. I'm not, I do believe in religious liberty, but I don't want it imposed on me. For the sake, and this is interesting, pay attention to the ideas of motherhood and fatherhood in this next quote. For the sake of child well-being, programs should affirm that children require and deserve both the love and nurturing of a mother and the play and protection of a father. In case you were wondering what gender roles were expected in the Bible and in the Constitution and whatever else. And then the next Health and Human Services Secretary should reverse the Biden administration's focus on LGBTQ plus equity, subsidizing single motherhood, God forbid, disincentivizing work and penalizing marriage, replacing such policies with those encouraging marriage, work, motherhood, fatherhood, and nuclear families. So that's the kind of language And you can really break it down. It demonizes and it calls for demonizing and defunding childcare. This is what they say: children who spend significant time in daycare experience higher rates of anxiety, depression, and neglect. Not true. As well as poor educational and developmental outcomes. Not true. Instead of providing universal daycare, God forbid, funding should go to parents either to offset the cost of staying home with the child, preferably the mom staying home, or to pay for familial in-home childcare. What's that, like grandma? Like we heard Vance say, grandma should do it all, right? Project 2025 calls for, quote, prioritizing funding for home-based childcare, not universal childcare. And it recommends eliminating Head Start, which they've made some progress towards. Head Start is the child care program for low-income families that has been incredibly successful and helped low-income children get a good start in life in our country. So the plan notably does not support paid parental leave for people that are, give birth while they're working. None of that socialist stuff. All right, next slide. Of course it eviscerates reproductive rights. Could you go back? One slide. Oh, go back one more. Oh yeah, you jumped ahead. So it pressures people to marry. So Project 2025 calls for spending money for temporary assistance to needy families, which is earmarked to help single mothers feed their hungry children, towards promoting marriage, healthy family formation, and delaying sex to prevent pregnancy. To pressure single fathers to marry, the plan directs the government to, quote, prioritize married father engagement. Married father, forget the single fathers, only married father engagement in its messaging, health, and welfare policies. Child support in the United States should strengthen marriage as the norm, restore broken marriages, and encourage unmarried couples to commit to marriage. Next slide. It stigmatizes single mothers. It condemns single mothers. The language is so kind of mind-blowing. Remember, like, a really significant number of people grow up in single mother families in the United States. Think how this feels to them. To make single parenting harder, the plan recommends adding work requirements for single parents receiving any non-cash benefit worth $50 per month for 6 consecutive months, including TANF. It adds work requirements to receive Medicaid. It redirects TANF grants meant to help low-income mothers feed their children toward anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers that coerce pregnant women to carry unwanted pregnancies to term and have children they cannot afford to feed. They've been doing this for a while, but they want to really ratchet it up, and they are ratcheting it up. Many of these things are happening, and I'll give you a quick overview of what's actually happened and what they yet haven't gotten to. Next slide. It, of course, eviscerates abortion rights, calls on the next president to direct the head of the FDA to withdraw approval for abortion pills, and of course, RFK is doing a review right now of abortion pills, which are used in over 2/3 of abortions in this country, including in Democratic places, so that would apply nationwide. So we'd lose access to a lot of abortion access, and go back to either get rid of pills all the way, or at least go back to the pre-2016 limitation and prohibit the mailing of abortion pills, prohibit telehealth abortion, which is now 1 in 4 of every abortion in the United States. Call for misusing an 1873 anti-obscenity law called the Comstock Act to criminalize mailing any medication or item used to do abortion. So that's a backdoor abortion ban. Calls on the Department of Justice to criminally prosecute anyone who mails abortion pills by enforcing this anti-vice law from the 19th century, which is a misinterpretation. Withdraws Medicaid funds for states that require insurance to cover abortion. That would be us. Reverses the Biden administration's interpretation of EMTALA, which is the Emergency Medical Treatment and Active Labor Act, that requires treatment of women who experience pregnancy complications and miscarriage. If you show up at a hospital, you need to get care. Biden tried to enforce that. Trump immediately reversed that enforcement, said, let him die. Reverses Biden administration's support for travel to get abortion health care and prohibits Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicaid funds and allows states to defund Planned Parenthood and their state Medicaid plans. They didn't wait for that. They just built it right into the Reconciliation Act. They defunded Planned Parenthood. 1 million people are losing access to health care. And most of what Planned Parenthood gives is STD testing, pap smears, mammograms, just well appointments. That's most of what they do. Only 3% of their funding is for abortion, and federal funds have never gone to that. And then, of course, contraception. So what's happening is people are losing access to contraception at the same time that abortion's been banned. And that's pronatalism in the era of Trump, right? Okay, next slide. They're calling for surveillance of pregnant women. Project 2025 would withdraw Biden administration guidance protecting the privacy of abortion patients under HIPAA. They've already done that. Under the threat of funding loss, the plan would require each state to report to the CDC, which no longer exists, accurate and reliable statistical data about abortion survivors, and abortion-related maternal deaths. This is about trying to get names of doctors and patients to go after them. And then there's this quote, because liberal states have now become sanctuaries for abortion tourism, HHS should use every available tool, including the cutting of funds, to ensure that every state reports exactly how many abortions take place within its borders, at what gestational age, for what reason, the mother's state of residence, and by what methods. Again, they're trying to get information to go after the people. Next slide. On contraception and sex education, Project 2025 calls for reversing the Affordable Care Act's requirement that health insurance cover contraception without copays. They haven't actually done this yet, interestingly, but they're still going after contraception, like defunding Planned Parenthood. The plan would revive the Trump administration's broad religious and moral exemptions to the contraceptive mandate, which allows employers to deny health insurance coverage for any form of contraception. He has done that. He has done that. Project 2025 would also eliminate insurance coverage for morning after pill Ella. That hasn't happened yet, but I'm waiting. Ella is it's an emergency contraception. Project 2025 would direct public funding away from contraception and toward, get this, fertility awareness education. You know what remember that back in the day? It's like finding out when you're ovulating by using temperature and then not having sex when you're ovulating. Not a great reliable form of contraception. But they're big on this. And again, because it's consistent with the Catholic Church, like they don't want you to use contraception, but you can use abstinence not to get pregnant. So if you're testing your fertility and figuring out when you're fertile and then not having sex, then they're fine with that. And they want to make it imposed on all of you. And then finally, on sex education, the plan would allow only abstinence-based lessons, which teach participants to, quote, refrain from non-marital sexual activity. A notoriously ineffective approach. If you look at what schools are teaching abstinence-based, they have higher unwanted teen pregnancy rates. That's the data, but they don't seem to care. Actually, they want more teens to have children, but that's a different issue. It would eliminate the requirement that sex education programs be evidence-based. Next slide. It would redirect federal research dollars. HHS should create and promote a research agenda that supports pro-life policies and explores the harms, both mental and physical, that abortion has wrought on women and girls. No. Look at the Turnaway study. Abortion does not impose harms. It's being denied an abortion that imposes harm, being forced to carry a pregnancy against your will that imposes harms, or in situations where you're in a violent relationship, or you can't, you don't have an income to feed the children you have, much less another one. And then the CDC should fund studies into the risks and complications of abortion and ensure that it corrects and does not promote misinformation regarding the comparative health and psychological benefits of childbirth versus the health and psychological risks and intentionally taking a human life through abortion. Childbirth is 17 times more dangerous than abortion. And again, there is no evidence that having an abortion causes any psychological harm on a population. I mean, an individual, but usually it's not because of the abortion, it's because of the other things going on in their lives. Again, Turnaway study, 10-year longitudinal study, 52 peer-reviewed studies came out of it. It's a book, it's a play. It actually tries to go after this myth that the anti-abortion movement has been spreading for years, that women regret their abortions or that they're psychologically harmed. Okay, the workplace. So they want to rescind Lyndon Johnson's executive order prohibiting race and sex discrimination in the civil service and by government contractors. Trump did that in the first week. Lyndon Johnson's executive order, gone. Narrow the applicability of Title VII, which prohibits sex and race discrimination in employment, including ending disparate impact cases. He's done that. And refusing to enforce laws against LGBTQ discrimination. He's done that. Expand religious exemptions for employers to discriminate based on sex. Check. Weaken the power of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to enforce Title VII. Check. Stop wage gap research and enforcement, check. And diminish the rights of unions, check. He's done all of that. This one, I remember the first time he was in office, so my students are back there. I have a slide when I do the wage gap. Yeah, there's 2 of them back there. In the slide, I have a link to the government website that has the wage data. And in 2017, in the fall, when I was teaching the class, I was checking my links, and I clicked the link, and there was nothing there. And I'm like, what? Trump's removing data from the websites? You know, like now we're like, oh yeah, right, he's removing everything. But back then it was like, it was early, and we were like, that didn't usually happen. You know, when president, and I had traced this for a long time. You know, like Bush didn't take down wage data information, you know, I mean, and so anyway, yeah, they're doing that on steroids now. Next slide. I mean, education, again, eliminate the Department of Education, including the Office of Civil Rights, which enforces civil rights law, including Title IX. Reverts to the Trump administration's Title IX sexual harassment and assault standards, which place burdensome restrictions on the ability of survivors to report assault and obtain justice, check. Narrow the meaning of Title IX to only prohibit discrimination because of biological sex rather than also gender stereotyping, check. He did that in an executive order. Of course, this is just his interpretation. Courts can differ, and courts are that's the law, not what Trump randomly says in some, you know, executive order. And then increase public funding of religious education through expansion of school choice policies and give federal funds to states as block grants with no strings attached. So, except probably not Democratic states. So that's where we are. So next slide. So this is my story. After 100 days, I went back and I looked and I'm like, okay, how much of Project 2025 that Trump said he didn't know anything about has he done in 100 days? 100 days. Well, a third. Next slide. I looked for this presentation, how about now? Where are we now? This is a website called Project 2025 .observer, and this is like tracks how much of what he's done, and I'm going to show you some data from that website. I think it's reliable, I mean, more or less. So there's 312 objectives in Project 2025. As of today, or yesterday when I prepped this, 121 had been accomplished, 38%. 66 of the remaining objectives are in progress. So between those two, it's like 2/3, or well, 58%. Work on 42%, 132 has not yet started. So that you can see this overall project progress. Oh wait, 319, my numbers aren't adding up. But anyway, it's more or less that. And that's the like circle. Okay, next slide. So I'm gonna just go through and let you see in areas related to women's rights, how far along are they? What are they doing? So if you look at reproductive health, they've accomplished 12 out of 31 with 5 in progress. I'll get more details in a second. LGBTQ, they've really gone 19, 11 done, 4 in progress. Civil rights, 12 done, 12 overall, 9 done, 1 in progress. And aid, and I put that because that's all the like WIC and Head Start and things that help single mothers care for their children. 13 total, 10 done, 2 in progress. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just sort of, I just pulled some stuff off to show the things that they've accomplished. And you can see, and there's notes. I find this is helpful because it's just like sort of, I mean, obviously it's very macro, but it can give you a sense of some of the things that they've done. So this is pulling in particular off the reproductive health. So, you know, he withdrew Biden's HIPAA guidance. He's promoting fertility awareness. He's rescinding guidance that requires hospitals to perform an abortion to save a woman's life. He's clarifying that no employer is required to provide accommodations for abortion. DOJ should withdraw from lawsuits seeking to uphold EMTALA requirements. That's EMTALA is the law that requires you to treat a woman that's in critical condition when she gets to the hospital. Accommodation for religious employees, next slide. These are the kind of things that they have completed that come from Project 2025. Prohibit USA, I mean, of course they've destroyed USAID. He did the global gag rule immediately, you know, which is cutting off aid to any organization that mentions the A word in any way. Prohibit abortion travel funding in the Department of Defense, so if you're stationed somewhere, you're out of luck. Reverse prohibitions on healthcare discrimination based on pregnancy. Enforce the Hyde Amendment. Hyde Amendment prohibits federal funding from being used for abortions, which is not being used, but they always say it is. Reinstate the Mexico City policy. That's a global gag rule, avoid politically motivated prosecutions. This is really interesting. There's a law that you may remember in 1993, the FACE Act, Freedom of Access to Clinics Entrances Act, which was passed because of all those clinic blockades. Remember Wichita, the Summer of Mercy in Wichita? So FACE stopped all that, if you noticed. I mean, and you know, that, they were also killing a lot of doctors back then. It stopped all those massive protests, and it's been very effective. What Trump did when he first got into office, there had been some people convicted under that act for invading abortion clinics and like disrupting care. They'd been convicted and put in prison because they had terrorized these clinics. He pardoned them, like in the first week, a bunch of them. And he said, we're no longer going to enforce the FACE Act to protect abortion clinics. We're going to enforce it to protect anti-abortion crisis pregnancy centers, which aren't attacked anyway, but you know, like he twisted it around. Next slide. End taxpayer funding of Planned Parenthood. So they have defunded Planned Parenthood. There are lawsuits fighting that, but like here in Massachusetts, Planned Parenthood no longer gets federal funds. Maura Healey's stepping in to help fund Planned Parenthood in the meantime, but across the nation, Planned Parenthoods are closing down. And often, they are the only care in communities. So they are turning communities into healthcare deserts and contraceptive deserts at a time when abortion is illegal in many of these places. And then so women end up with unwanted pregnancies, they carry them to term, and then there's no government support because they should have found a man. They should have found a man, or they shouldn't have had premarital sex. So they deserve to be, and their child deserves to be hungry. Yeah, right, exactly. They do want to replace government social services with religious, because then there's lots of strings attached, right? Crisis pregnancy centers. Yeah, you can have a bag of diapers, but you have to go to Bible study first. You know, and eliminate HHS reproductive health care access for task force and install a pro-life task force. Of course they did that. Prioritize traditional heterosexual marriage in its messaging, health, and welfare policies. They want to go after same-sex marriage. And I can say more about that if you're interested, but there are efforts. The Southern Baptist Convention has now made their #1 political priority is to get rid of same-sex marriage. Prevent the VA from covering abortion services. They've done that, and there's a lot of controversy. Restore Trump-era religion. Okay, we talked about that. So next slide. These are the things they haven't started, but this is what I'm sure we have to look forward to. All sorts of things. And I won't dwell here. I mean, pass the Born Alive Abortion Survivors Protection Act. I mean, ban abortion is what that means. Withdraw Biden-era guidance that allow retail pharmacies to dispense abortion pills. Rescind policy of Office of Refugee Resettlement to provide abortion access for pregnant, unaccompanied immigrant youth. Remember in his first term, he was trying to force girls who'd been raped coming over the border, who were pregnant, who were in detention centers, trying to force them to carry those pregnancies to term. Yeah, he's trying to do it again. All right, next slide. And then it goes on and on. Get rid of ACA's requirement to cover the morning after pill, enforce this Comstock law, that's that 19th century anti-vice. These haven't started yet. I've been looking very carefully to see when they'll start, but they haven't yet. It goes on and on. The Republicans, I talked about defunding Planned Parenthood. Over 1 million women have been getting health care from Planned Parenthood. A lot of them are now losing it. And remember, they're serving low-income women. Okay, next slide. Violence against women, he's trying to roll back that. He has rolled back that in his first month in office. He pardoned, as I said, these anti-abortion extremists that were shutting down clinics. He's defunded domestic and sexual violence services across the country, while rates of domestic violence have increased this year, especially in states banning abortion. So violence is going up, and he's defunding the shelters that help women escape from violence. Convicted of sexual assault. Okay, this, of course. And then, of course, the Title IX stuff. Next slide. Workplace. Trump and Republicans have dismantled longstanding protections against workplace sex discrimination, as well as more recently developed protections, such as the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which requires employers, this passed in 2023. It kind of didn't get a lot of publicity, but it required employers to accommodate pregnant people. So if somebody's pregnant and they're working at a cashier and they just need to sit down a little bit every hour, it would require them to do it as long as it wasn't too burdensome on employers. Well, Trump's trying to gut that. They're trying to, because they don't really want pregnant women in the workplace. They should be at home getting ready for the child, right? But we're not going to give you any support to do that. It's sort of a, since January, and this is, I think, so important. Since January, 445,000 women have left the workforce, and the share of working mothers has hit its lowest levels since COVID-19. It's not only because of the Trump administration, although he is contributing. It also has to do with employers going back, return to work policies, but it has a lot to do with like getting rid of Head Start. Actually, go to the next slide, because I have a slide on Head Start, which I think is the next slide. So here's what he's done with Head Start. First, in January, the administration imposed a federal funding freeze that temporarily paused congressionally approved money for Head Start and other programs. Then, the administration restructured HHS, resulting in mass layoffs and the closure of 5 regional Head Start offices. Then, as of April 2025, the administration had withheld nearly $1 billion in federal grants for Head Start compared to the previous year, causing centers to close and risking others. Where are the kids going? Where are the kids going? No wonder 500,000 women have left the workforce. Meanwhile, 100,000 more men have entered the workforce. That's what they want. They want breadwinning men, stay-at-home pregnant women. Executive order on DEI in March 25, the administration sent a letter to Head Start recipients instructing them to remove DEI initiatives, and if they didn't, they're not getting their funds. 2026 budget proposal does not specify a funding level for Head Start at all, leaving the program's future funding uncertain. This is just gutting the Head Start network. Next slide. Oh, that's the end. That's my book, by the way. So I realized I didn't build any what's the fight back? I mean, there's a lot of fight back at all levels. But I like to sort of talk about this because this is my most recent book, and I have a whole separate talk on this book. And why I give this talk a lot, and people always leave feeling really encouraged. And I know right now you're probably not feeling very encouraged. But so I'll just tell you a little bit about, and this is the QR code. It's available open access. You can read it online, although I'm also selling some copies out in the out back. But so Trump appointed 3 right-wing conservatives with the funding of Leonard Leo to the Supreme Court. They got a supermajority. They overturned 50-year precedent of constitutional abortion rights, right? Dobbs. Half of states banned abortion. The number of abortions has gone up. And people are surprised by that. It's like, wait a minute, you ban abortion in half the country and the number of abortions has gone up? How? And I think that it's complicated as to, I think it's going up because he's getting rid of contraception, and there's a lot of reasons that it's going up. But how is it going up if it's illegal? Like, how are people accessing it? Well, there is an intense movement where determined, courageous, and creative activists said, no way, and figured out a way to get abortion pills in people's hands. And some of it's underground, and I write on this. Just the other day, I did a piece for Ms. I interviewed somebody in the underground network, which is distributing pills to over 100,000 people a year. But a lot of it's happening above ground through the medical system, through telehealth abortion, which is why they're going after abortion pills so much. And that infrastructure, that's what my book is about. How did that happen? It's been a long time coming. It's been a movement-wide strategy. Not everybody agreed on it, that it was a good thing. So there were fights within the movement, which I detail with For Harmony in my book. It's an interesting story. But the bottom line is, they turned it around. We lost Roe and we gained access. And we did it, it was an unintended consequence. It put the fire in the belly. I always say it's a lot of older women who remember pre-Roe and were like, no way. I love those women, and some of them are retired OB-GYNs, but some of them are just grandmothers, and they're just like, this isn't, no way, not my granddaughter. And so, some of them are taking real risks. They're so brave. I just really admire them. And so I find that story really encouraging. The ways in which we are turning to mutual aid, the ways in which we are breaking out of our, sometimes people on the left, or at least in the Democratic Party, were like, well, these are the rules. And so we've got to follow the rules, and we've got to do it, and we've got to be careful. And, a lot of abortion doctors were like that, and in part because they'd had a target on their back for so long, and they're doctors, they're risk averse, right? They're all lawyered up, and the lawyers are risk averse. And so it happened outside of the normal structures. And I think, we're seeing this with the No Kings marches. A lot of it's happening outside of any organized structures. It's just like angry people in the streets that are like, no more.
Like Whately Civic.
Yeah. And so I guess I am very encouraged. Well, I'm encouraged by the elections on Tuesday. Yes. Yeah, totally. I'm encouraged by the turnout in the streets, and not just at the No Kings marches, but at the Tesla dealerships, on the corners, on the streets, and not just in liberal places like here, in Kentucky and in Georgia and in, like all across the country. I'm encouraged. So I've written a lot about, there's a group, I did a piece right after the election about, okay, what's the strategy going forward? I don't have it in here, but Democracy Forward is a coalition of 200 progressive organizations that had their own Project 2025. It was more of, they did this intense threat assessment list. They had been preparing for about a year, because even though everybody hoped that the Democrats would win, they knew it was a risk that Trump would come back, and they knew it would be Trump on steroids. So they did this amazing, they sent it to me at one point, it was this huge spreadsheet with all the threats, and with a plan. Like, they had people ready to file lawsuits on all 312 things, and they have filed so many lawsuits, and they have won so many lawsuits, which is great, and we know this, right? The problem is when they get appealed, the Supreme Court's saying, well, let's just wait and take our time and see what, and so that's what we're up against. Although I was encouraged by the oral arguments in the tariff case yesterday. So, we'll see. But, this fight has just begun. And Americans, we don't, even though obviously I lost some faith in the actual election, I also think there's a lot of grassroots people that are angry and don't like, the numbers, his polls are in the toilet. And I think there's enough empowered Americans that, maybe we can turn this around, but we all need to be working hard, really hard, and not turning on each other, but turning together. I think we've been too divided on the left and too nitpicky, the calling out stuff, which I see a lot in my context. We need to work across our differences and be okay with our differences. And so anyway, I'm gonna stop there, but I don't know if I have any time, but I'll take your questions if I do. Thank you.
I've got the mic working, you can use it to ask the question.
Or you can use this one. This one still works.
Okay, any questions for Karen? Let me get out of the sun.
I know. It's very simple.
Yes.
I just want to ask whether you noticed in the New York Times today that they, at the headline, there was a online discussion which they organized between opinion columnists or between an opinion columnist and outside experts. Mm-hmm. And this particular one was hosted by one of the New York Times conservative columnists. Mm-hmm. And the headline was, "Have Women Ruined the Workplace?" And, that was the headline. So I went ahead and canceled my subscription.
Yeah, right. Yeah, good for you. I canceled a little while
I can't
ago.
take it anymore.
I know.
They're not sliding to the right.
Yeah.
They're racing to the right.
They're sucking up to Trump.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
I think they're sucking up to Trump.
But
Yeah.
the discussion itself was insane. So I was just wondering what. It's not so much of a question as what you think.
So, yeah, so my students know this. I get very frustrated with the New York Times. I do read the headlines because I can subscribe to Smith for free because I feel like I need to know what they're doing. But I have actually written several articles calling them out for the way they cover issues around reproductive rights in particular. I've written, I think, 2 Ms. Magazine articles, and of course I submit one thing and then they have to like tone it down because media shouldn't be totally taking pot shots at other media, but they kind of deserve it. Yeah, but yeah, it's very, very frustrating. I mean, just even that question and the way that it's framed is so frustrating. It's just.
It was the headline.
Yeah.
That's what bothered me.
Yeah.
I didn't really care about what they talked
Right.
about or who they were.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, trying to figure out what news to watch or to, where to get your news, it's hard right now because of that kind of stuff. And I like to know what the New York Times is saying, but I also read The Guardian for an international perspective. Of course, I follow all the Ms. writing. It's feminist media, so it's looking at, not only looking at issues that impact women, but looking at it from a feminist perspective. And I'm on a lot of different sources that aren't like traditional, it's certainly not mainstream media sources. I love Heather Cox Richardson. I listen to her every day. I listen to, I do listen to Rachel Maddow. She's only once a week now, but I do think she's encouraging because she's really focused on reporting on the protests, which the mainstream media is ignoring. And to me, that's really encouraging to know that all those protests are ongoing. We never hear about them except from her. And that, that encourages me to know that, like when I mentioned earlier, people in rural Kentucky are protesting. How do I know that? From Rachel. Like otherwise I would not know that. She spends a lot of time reading local headlines of headlines of local papers around the country to kind of get a feel of what's actually going on out there, out of the Beltway. And I find that very helpful. And that's what gives me hope because people are resisting, But yeah, no, I mean, New York Times is disappointing. Good for you for canceling. I mean, on the other hand, I feel like we need to support media, because he's destroying media. So I don't know. It's hard. Anyone else have any questions? I know we're at time, but how about one more? Yeah.
Could you say more about their planned attacks on same-sex marriage?
Yeah, planned attack on same-sex marriage. We just did this in class. My 2 students can chime in here. So, did you know that Kim Davis has a suit before the Supreme Court? She's trying, remember Kim Davis was the Kentucky clerk who refused to marry a couple and got sued and fined, and she's appealing the fine up to the Supreme Court. There's supposed to be a discussion among the court on tomorrow about whether to take that case. It seems highly unlikely they'll take it because it's a very irregular way of getting there, and it's not a very good case if they in fact wanted to reconsider it. But in her petition, she cites the dissent of Thomas in Dobbs, where Thomas called for the overturning of Obergefell, which is the same-sex marriage case. Now, do you remember though that after Dobbs, oddly, Congress, rather than passing a law to legalize abortion, passed a law to legalize marriage? Do you remember that? It's called the Respect for Marriage Act. Congress passed it and Biden signed it. Now, it doesn't entirely help, but it does help because what it says is for federal purposes, marriage includes same-sex couples. So not only would the Supreme Court have to overturn Obergefell, they'd also have to either strike down the Respect for Marriage Act or Congress would have to reverse the Respect for Marriage Act. Now, if they get rid of the filibuster, which is now what they're talking about doing, they could do that. And like I said, the Southern Baptist Convention said that one of their primary goals is to overturn same-sex marriage. And this Project 2025 report is just full of homophobic language and policy proposals, including getting rid of same-sex marriage. So, I'm worried. I'm definitely worried. I think that there are some barriers. And Obergefell was just 10 years ago. Can you believe it was 10 years ago? I teach it, and I said to my students, I'm like, 2015? That's 10 years ago. It doesn't seem like it was, I don't know, it just seems recent.
It's been forever.
What's that?
It's been forever.
Yeah. And so, Anyway, it would be weird for the court to overturn a decision like that. I don't know that they could get a majority, even though obviously the court's very right wing. But that decision was so interesting because it was very conservative in its language. Kennedy wrote it, Republican appointee, right, who ceded his seat to Kavanaugh. It's all about the traditional family and family is the cornerstone of society. I mean, some of the language could have come out of here. And I mean, I think he did that strategically. I think that's what he really believed. But I don't know. I am definitely worried, but I mean, the fact that Congress, in response to Dobbs, passed the Respect for Marriage Act to protect same-sex marriage, I'll tell you why I don't think it's going to happen. It's because I think there's a bunch of log cabin Republicans, a bunch of gay white men who are high up in the Republican Party who don't want it. So I don't think it's going to happen. I don't know. It could. I think we should be prepared. I really do. I mean, I was talking to my students. I was telling them about the old days. Do you remember the old days when you could be married in New York, but not in your federal taxes? So you'd have to file New York taxes as a married couple, and the student, yeah. Oh. And then if you got married in one state and you moved to another and they didn't respect same-sex marriage, you couldn't get divorced. You had to move back to your other state, establish residency to get divorced. I mean, it was crazy. It was chaos. And I was trying to explain that world, which they were 5 years old when all that was going on. So, yeah. So I don't know. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
So I just came from teaching at university and Turning Point is alive and well.
A turning point is alive and well at the universities, yeah. Here, I can.
What's a turning point?
That's Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA.
So, yeah, I can speak up. Turning Point USA was alive and well. Alive and well, where I teach at Westfield State University.
Oh.
And they gathered a lot of students in a fairly contained space. They had an agenda of stopping abortion rights
Yes.
and stopping other rights of women, including voting.
Yes. Yeah. They were talking about voting rights, rolling back voting rights.
And they were filming the whole thing for the purpose of agitating our students,
Yeah.
filming our students, and then putting it
Yeah.
online.
That's what Charlie Kirk was all about, trying to get a rise and get a media clip.
I was very proud of them.
Good.
They were baited.
Yeah. And they didn't rise.
Didn't overreact
Yeah.
to students. I don't think that's necessarily going to end that way, but
Yeah.
they are alive and well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Erica Kirk supposedly has taken it over. I don't think she's going to be as effective as Charlie Kirk, but who knows? But yeah, I mean, so this is Charlie Kirk's organization that he built from scratch with the funding of, help me, the guy that funded is, what's his name? I can't remember, but he's a billionaire. And it was about trying to get more young people to be conservative. Yeah, Peter Thiel, right, who's the guy behind J.D. Vance as well. Technology, I think he's a Silicon Valley guy, that's where he got all his money. So the strategy is, golly, young people are more liberal than conservative, so we need to have a movement on the ground to convert the young people over to the, and a lot of the times they don't have a lot of context, and Kirk shows up on campus and he's all cool and fun, and and he brings over a lot of people. Although, young men are much more drawn. In the last election, not Tuesday, but in 2024, young men usually don't vote much, but they voted a lot more. Trump and company really focused to mobilize young men. And of course, the kind of campaign that Trump ran was this sort of remember Hulk Hogan and all that? And the influencers, all the influencers were helping with that. And so young men voted more. Young women were as left as ever. By the way, there was a huge gender gap in Tuesday's election. This doesn't often get covered in the mainstream media, but Ms. just put it up an article, and it's always like this. And there was a huge gap, especially among young people. Such interesting. Young women are going to the left and young men are going to the right. But actually, the most latest data is showing young men are coming back more to the center. I think they were just sort of inspired by you know, the circus of the Republican convention and the Hulk Hogan and the UFC, Ultimate Fighting Club guy, what's his name, all of that. But I know we're probably almost, I'm being guided by you. I'll just answer questions until you tell me it's over.
2 more questions.
2 more? Okay, yes.
So I just wanted to say, are you familiar with Jessica Valenti's
Yes.
Substack?
Abortion Every Day. It's very helpful.
Okay.
If you want to know about reproductive, or abortion in particular, Jessica Valenti has a Substack called Abortion Every Day. It's free, and it's very helpful. That's one of my news sources to just, because it's everywhere. Like I don't know how she does it, but she covers like what's happening in Wisconsin today. You know, she really, and as a scholar working in this area, it's very helpful to me. But yeah, that's a great source. All right, anybody?
Okay, we have one more comment
Okay.
from Nancy Talanian, who doesn't know she's going to say this, but she's going to talk about our next presentation.
Excellent, excellent. All right.
All right, you need a microphone, Nancy. Okay. Well, thanks, everyone. I think most of you actually have the leaflet that has all the information that I have about our next program, which is Wednesday, December 10th. And it's going to be on access to healthcare and how it's changing and what we can do. We have one speaker already, Alison Vandervelden. She's the CEO of the Community Health Center of Franklin County. She's wonderful. She's also a dentist. I miss having her as my dentist, but she's gone on to bigger and better things. And I'm working on getting another speaker from our legislature to talk about how the national changes to Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, are affecting their work and their ability to provide health care access to Massachusetts residents. So, thank you for taking my leaflet. Hope to see you all here again in a month, and tell your friends. Thank you.
And on behalf of the Whately Civic Organization, thank you all for coming out, and a special thanks to Carrie for very much.